Welcome to the Art of the Game podcast. We are back for season 2. I'm Cass, and here for the ride are my co-hosts and co-founders, Reese and Ryan.
We started this podcast off the back of our business, Sport Design Australia, with the purpose of exploring the intersection of the sporting and creative industries. We wanted to bring you the biggest names in sports design and content excellence.
Our guests this season are providing us with perspectives from all across the world, giving us insight into the artistry behind content and how it influences every aspect of the game. Whether you are a sports enthusiast, a designer, or a creator, Art of the Game will have something for you.
Welcome back to another episode of our Art of the Game podcast. Super pumped to introduce our guest today, all the way from the USA, Neil Horowitz. Neil has been a long-time friend of Sport Design Australia, starting back when we were all at the NRL, with both myself and Ryan previously appearing on his podcast, Digital and Social Media Sports, which has been running for over 10 years now, which is pretty wild. He's one of our favourites in the global sports, content, media and digital landscape, and he's an absolute OG of the sports, the social media sports world. So a big welcome to our man, Neil. G'day, mate.
Thank you for that great intro. And dude, I don't even want to think about how old you were. You were probably like in diapers almost when I started. So I love it though.
Yeah, it's been quite a while actually since the NRL, or when we first, I guess, got in contact. But it's been a cool journey, and both of us, are in different spots now, which is cool.
Hell yeah! All the way from San Diego, California, of course. And I've enjoyed watching your guys' career, ascend throughout from NRL days to now Sport Design Australia, and helping to elevate everything out there in Australia and New Zealand as well.
Yeah, we appreciate you. You're too kind, and you've been a big supporter of ours, and we absolutely love all of the content and the work that you do in the sporting space. And I think the biggest thing is your curiosity and overarching passion for the space is it's unreal, and it's great to have people in the industry like yourself that people can learn off, people who have been in the industry for a while or people who are new to the industry. So yeah, we appreciate you, and thanks for coming on. I think to get us started, it'd be great, like Reese gave us a bit of an intro, but it'd be good to get a bit of a background from your side of things, your journey through sport, what you're up to at the moment, and yeah, just a bit of a reflection of your time.
Totally. No, and I appreciate the kind words. I think for me too, like just doing the podcast, being active on social, sharing examples, it really is just like I was learning on my own, and then I'm like, why don't we learn together? And why don't I share my notes with the rest of the community? And it's been cool to see that this community has really come together over the years, and we all teach each other. But yeah, my background, everyone grew up loving sports, and I did as well. I did not know what I wanted to do when I went to college, went to undergrad and university. But then thought I would become like an ESPN Sports Center anchor, and so started my own Sports Center for Yale Sports, basically, and learned how to video edit, Final Cut Pro, lugging around these giant external hard drives that now like you can fit a terabyte in your pocket. I was lugging around bricks that were like 100 gigs, crazy back then, and also kind of got my foot in the door with just thinking about what it was like to do storytelling, what it was like to produce highlights, produce interviews, and ultimately also got some writing experience in the newspaper space. Decided I didn't want to be a talking head on SportsCenter, probably a better face for radio, I guess. But ultimately got my first gig in the National Hockey League, the NHL. I know ice hockey's not quite as big over there as it is here, but we love it, and hopefully it'll continue to grow there. But my ability to do quick short form edits that were good enough for the website, good enough for the mobile app and social media, but maybe not quite to the level of like going on the broadcast or going on the video board. That sort of quick hit stuff after practice, after games, doing quick interviews, thinking about packaging for this new emerging social media thing. When I started, Twitter didn't have images and video. It was and Facebook was just Facebook, and that was it. There was no Instagram. We went through dating myself, of course, but went through all the evolution of new platforms that came and went. Google Plus, RIP, among many others, and started our Instagram page, and we really grew up in the space with the Ducks, and also doing the social media for Honda Center as well, which is the venue. So got to also cover concerts, and that was also a nice little perk on the side. And ultimately ended up moving from there. Had a short stint at a pharmaceutical marketing agency. That's just young and dumb and chasing a really good offer financially. We don't need to talk about doing social media for like Alzheimer's disease and irritable bowel syndrome. Those were different times for sure. Looking at message boards about IBS. Got back into sports, and around that time too, I started getting really involved in the SM sports community, and was getting into listening to podcasts and radio and all that. During this time between the Ducks and the pharma company, wanted to continue to stay involved in the sports space and realized that I wanted to hear people talk about social media and sports, and there really wasn't enough to whet my appetite. I definitely got onto the Sports Geek podcast with Sean Callanan, probably a name that you guys and your listeners would know as well from that part of the world. And I wanted more. I wanted to be able to get more of it. So I decided, hey, why don't I start a podcast? It can't be that hard. I looked up how to do it. Got an incredible first guest from the San Francisco Giants, Brian Sarabian. I always tell him that wouldn't have happened without him. And 10, 11 years later, here we are. And then so to kind of pivot here, because we're kind of going in parallel pathways, got back into sports with the Phoenix Coyotes, now Arizona Coyotes, another hockey team. Started to build up a network at that point and knew some folks at the Coyotes. Got into more of a social media manager role there, social media marketing role there. So a little bit beyond the day-to-day content creation. Still doing a little bit of that, working with the video team, but also started thinking more about finding an analytics solution and developing how we're going to report on success of things. Looking at our paid social and how that interacted with our organic content. Looking at the analytics behind our video programming and what was working, what was not working. And also started talking to and making friends with the partnerships teams, the sponsorship teams, to be able to think about, this is before it was kind of a given that you would monetize social through sponsorships. And so we were kind of doing the first thing. I remember the first thing we sold was a sponsorship of our happy birthday posts. And we sold it to a storage company or something, like a Bob Storage, like one of those small things. And it sticks in my memory because I was like, holy shit, this is real. Like, we can do this. This was with the Coyotes for a kind of a brief stint, and then got into the startup world. Wanted to get back into Southern California and joined a mobile app company that also did mobile apps and loyalty programs and coverage of live events. And I was working with a bunch of major college athletics programs as well as venues, helping them to get people onto their app. But ultimately, it was fan engagement from all angles, mobile fan engagement. So we were learning a lot about what goes into a fan experience, both in and out of the venue, whether that's AR or Ticketmaster SDKs or mobile payments and mobile ordering and even being able to activate the second screen while you're watching the game and activate them in the moment, thinking about data capture. And it was a lot of fun working with all these programs and also independent small teams as well that are oftentimes the most open to some of my crazy ideas. I always have lots of crazy ideas. And also learning about how to monetize these new platforms, which this is a lesson that I'll take with me as well, is there was a time where I was starting to get intimidated. I was going to meet with these big sponsorship teams that were like, these 40, 50-year-old guys that have been in the industry for so many years. And I was like, they're gonna see right through me. They're gonna know that I'm an imposter. I don't know what I'm talking about. But then I realized that they didn't know what they were talking about either. And we're kind of learning as we go about how to monetize these new platforms, what ROI of social and digital and mobile looks like. And and really just making sense of, okay, let's add up these numbers here and look at these numbers here and compare it to what we're doing on these other platforms that we have kind of established standards. So really it was an awesome time to be there. I was there for basically from almost the days that the startup opened its doors to the day they closed its doors. Most startups fail. We made it pretty far, but it ultimately closed its doors, and I was back on the prowl. And then got my way into Greenfly, which actually happened through my podcast. I had the guys from Greenfly on, and it led to a great discussion, led to a consulting agreement. I was consulting at the time as well, doing some part-time consulting, and that became hey, we want to bring you on full-time. And I've been here now for almost 5 years. It'll be later this year, 5 years in August, September. And I do a little bit of everything here. We started out in marketing, also help a lot with our strategy and analytics, some partnerships, some competitive research and product marketing, helping to tell the story of what content works in the short form space and how to set up operationally, how to think about ROI, how to think about monetizing. So it's a lot of fun. And there's a lot of rambling from me, but hopefully it gives you some background on where I'm coming from and why I love the space and I'm so passionate about it and energetic about it.
Yeah, I think my mind's about to explode with all the things that you've done. The thing that comes to my mind is you're a bit of a pioneer, and you're probably not you're too humble to admit it, but it sounds like you're at the forefront of a lot of things and really interesting perspective on your time in the sports space. And I'd love to understand, how do you consistently stay curious? Because that's the biggest thing that I take from you is that you're always curious. How do you stay so curious about the industry?
I mean, it's kind of the nature of these positions. When I was coming up first in the social media space, stuff, and it still happens, stuff changes all the time. You have to keep up with this new platform came about, this new feature came out. What do we do with it? Should we jump on it now? Should we wait? And so I always tell people that working in social and digital, it keeps you young because you have to keep up with what's latest and greatest. You're not going to get that monotonous of like, oh, I'm doing the same thing every day, because there's always something new that comes out. You have to also keep up with what the kids are doing to come off like an okay boomer or hello fellow kids. And so that's ultimately like that kind of a little bit of FOMO of like, what do I not know? And also like, what do I not know that other people know? I've often thought about this as well. I'd be curious about your guys' perspective also. The people in these social and digital spaces, that's where mostly of the rapid innovation and rapid evolution is happening. And you almost, like when I was with the Ducks early on and a new platform came out or a new mobile function came about, people will kind of look and be like, what do we know? What do we need to know here? Like you're kind of like the in-house subject matter expert, because it's no one else's job to keep up with these new digital and social tools, let alone on the hardware side. And so as like I've especially been curious over the last 4 or 5 years when Web3 came up and metaverse and blockchain and crypto and NFTs and all this new stuff that no one really knew. No one had a director of metaverse or anything like that internally, and was like, okay, well, what does a digital guy think, or what does a social media person think? Like, how does this kind of apply there? And so that kind of natural bent of always keeping up with what's latest and greatest kind of forces you to be involved. And also, we are all very online, and you get to see what other people are talking about and what people are learning. And again, kind of like I alluded to earlier, we all kind of learn together. And you ultimately just become this sponge of like, okay, what's this person doing here, and how they do this, and I want to learn how they did that, and what does that mean for me? Like, how should we think about that? And I also am obsessive, especially being going from the social media space and thinking about fan behavior on these new platforms, how they're newly consuming sports, and then going to the mobile app space where I was with the startup that was called Hopscotch. Always think about how are fans behaving, how are they consuming content, how is that changing? And doesn't necessarily mean that you jump onto a platform like when Clubhouse comes out or when Be Real comes out. It's not like you go, okay, we got to jump on this new shiny toy. It's what is this new fan behavior that we need to learn about? Is it sticky? Should I apply it to a different social platform, like when Instagram comes out with a copy? Or should I think about it when I was on the mobile app space? Like, how should we think about this new behavior and take it onto our own and operated platform or to our in-game experience? Is there something that we should be thinking about from that new fan psychograph, so to speak? And as these new generations come up and consume sports in a different way, you almost have to like be comfortable feeling uncomfortable, because if you know everything, if you think you know everything, you're missing a lot. Or if you think that like this is the way that fans are supposed to experience something, even though other fans are feeling elsewhere, you have to be willing to say like, hey, I'm not the target audience anymore. I'm not the target fan. If we're trying to get 18 to 21 year olds or 24 year olds, whatever, that ship sailed for me a little while ago. So all I can do is try to learn what do they care about, and even if it's foreign to me or feels weird to me, that you have to be willing to say like, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great. I really love that reframe of when these new platforms come out, it's not about necessarily jumping on them. It's about understanding that behavioral change or that behavioral shift. I think that's such a great lesson to learn, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I guess that behavioral piece when we get into the NFL schedule release, because I think there's been a bit of discussion, I think prominently this year, around why do teams go so big on the schedule releases? Are they actually aligned to business strategy? What's the behavior of fans around it? So I'm definitely keen to kind of get more into that as well. I'd say the other piece I just wanted to pull out from that initial kind of overview of your career is the importance of your networking. Obviously, you spoke about how you had the Greenfly guys on as a guest on your podcast, and how they kind of eventually ended up with you being there. How important has networking been? And I think I know the answer, but it's great to hear it from you. How important has networking been in your career?
Yeah, when I talk to students or when I hear others think about networking, they always think about like how it's going to help me in my career. Like what's me and this person going to do for me? How's it going to get my next role? For me, like, yeah, I appreciate that. But I remember early on with the Ducks, with Anaheim Ducks, and realized that like as other teams would come in, the road teams would come in, and I would meet sort of my counterpart from the other team and be like, hey, we're all kind of just figuring this out at the same time. And I started doing phone calls with some of the other members of the greater social media networking space or social media space within the NHL at that time, and realized that when I got off the phone with them, like I learned so much, and hopefully they could say the same. And it was so cool to be like, hey, we can share knowledge with each other and kind of grow up in the space together. And at the time, like it wasn't a common thing necessarily to go and talk to your counterparts. Not everyone knew each other. Heck, like I even joke about this as a complete aside, but I kind of did not want anyone to know that I was the person behind at Anaheim Ducks handle. I wanted to keep that sort of that anonymity. And then, a few years later, of course, it became, and even now, of course, everyone's like a mini celebrity almost if they are the voice of the handle. But
yeah,
that aside, starting to learn who these other people are that are in my shoes and starting to learn from them, and then realizing we can all learn from each other. And that ultimately opened my eyes to the value of networking. And I also remember, this is a really, really dumb thing, but I remember the first time like someone in the sports space, someone I looked up to, replied to one of my tweets, and because I had replied to one of his tweets, and he replied back, and I was like, "Holy shit!" Like, there's a two-way conversation that can happen here, and people that I look up to, I can learn from them. And then the last thing I'll say too is I do this all the time now on LinkedIn. Like, I'll my LinkedIn like networking or connections will get the inbox will get pretty full sometimes because I'll like let it lapse, and then I'll have like 40 or 50 people that have requested to connect with me. I'm sure, I request all the time as well. But I go through that list and I'm like, I'm not just going to accept anyone that reaches out. I'm going to be like, if I'm going to accept this request, I'm going to message that person and say, hey, let's get on a phone call. I don't want to just have someone that I don't know, but I just like know them by face. Like, to be able to have the conversation and learn from them, have develop that sort of relationship a little bit, and then ultimately to be able to share that knowledge. And I even I do a lot of reach outs, of course, when I'm trying to book guests on the podcast, and I will tell people. I've had people multiple times, a ton of times actually, say I'm not comfortable going on, or I don't want to, upset my bosses or whatever. I'm like, it's cool with me. Let's just chat and not record it. And that's what it's all about, is having those great discussions. And again, it's not like because I'm gonna reach out and ask for a favor. I'm actually the opposite of that. Where if I'm going to a game or a match, I will not be the person that hits up someone's DMs and be like, hey, can I get a ticket? I like almost intentionally avoid doing that, and sometimes they'll still like see that I'm there. I'll tell them I'm going to be there, and because it's not about that. It's not about trying to get up necessarily. It's about learning from each other, supporting each other, and then if I can help someone else, that's great. And it's sort of that it sounds a little bit overly Pollyannish or utopian, but that's how I feel about it. Well, let's all learn from each other and help each other out, and not necessarily think about it of like, what's the person going to do for me? It's just somewhere down the road.
Love that. We need more people like you, Neil. We need more people like you.
I appreciate that.
We heard you kind of talk at the end there about your podcast. Let's get a little bit into your podcast. It's been going for, I think Reese and I were chatting before, I think nearly 10 years or over 10 years.
11 in August.
Wow, 11 years, over 200 guests. Give us a bit of a run through of the podcast, how it's evolved over time, and then we'll hit you with a few questions about it.
The main remit of the podcast has not really changed that much over the years. It's really been, I want to put sort of that business-y lens onto the social media and sports space. Not to say that we certainly have fun talking about like, memes and viral stuff and savage tweets and all that. But it's really been thinking about asking those next level questions of, why does this matter? Why are we doing it this way? How does this work operationally? And hopefully I ask those questions that kind of dive into that to really help someone learn practical, pragmatic stuff. And that's what I've gone after. And it's been cool to see too, like the people I've been able to have on, like the level of like seniority even, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. And that's been cool as I've grown up, my peers in the space and the people that have grown up in this generation and with us, they've ascended as well. And have had to, figure out how to manage a team, how to set strategy, how to set up how to learn to read a P&L and set up budgets. And so I've always tried to take that tact of like, I want someone to, I hope someone is learning. I'm learning as I go as well. You can tell hopefully on the interviews that I enjoy learning this stuff, and it's ultimately what I'm curious about. And hopefully that's what others are curious about as well. And that, again, it's not just sort of that frivolous talk about who's like, the complex rankings of who's number one in that and why, but it's ultimately of the ROI, the stuff that's really is going to help you become a better leader in the space, become a better professional, understand the why. And I always tell people too, like I always love the 5 whys framework. I think it's like a Harvard Business School thing or whatever. But if you take a decision or take a tactic and ask why 5 times, they almost like you put yourself in an 8-year-old's shoes. And if you ask why, like, I even do my job at Greenfly. Like we want our athletes to share more on social media. Well, why? Because it'll help us reach more fans. Well, why? Because they have bigger reach than us. They have more diverse fans. And, you keep on going down that why path, and all of a sudden you get to some really juicy, substantive things, and you start to understand, the greater reason for why we're doing these things. Because it's not just in a bucket, and and you can chase metrics and all day, but if they're not the right metrics, or if they're not tied to your goals, then that, what does it all matter? So I really love diving into, what is driving the decisions of the C-suite, what's driving these sort of ROI discussions of social media and digital media, and how can we learn from that? And also then how can we apply that in our own roles? And I'm always trying to think about, like, what is someone listening going to be able to take away from this and, take action on it tomorrow, or at least, learn an insight from it that they're going to be able to keep with them for the rest of their careers.
Yeah, I love that, and especially around the learnings. And I'd be interested to know, who your favourite guests have been, or what podcast has really stood out for you in the terms of, that was a really cool podcast. My listeners will get a lot of value out of that.
My favorite podcast is the most recent one. No, okay. It's definitely hard to pick your favorite children over the time. But I've been constantly blown away on the people that have been able to come on, and also people who have said, like, I have listened to it as well. And when you get those people that are really the high level decision makers, or the people also too that have been in the space a long time and have been able to talk about how they've grown up in that space and the learnings along the way. I know someone recently I had on. A couple of people really recently in 2024, actually, Jason Levine from the Chargers, and getting insight into the Chargers, the best social media in sports, perhaps, and how they do what they do, and getting his lens from a content strategy. He came up in the content space, and really getting his insight into how they think about content, how they structure a team, how they think about the ROI of content. And then another one too that I know was recent, just a couple months ago, was Dan Gadd, who's with the Atlanta Dream right now, and he's someone that. I've heard his name so much over the years. He and I actually almost worked together, which we didn't necessarily know at the time. But he is someone who's come up through this sort of digital strategy, and yes, being in the shoes of content, but also starting to understand of things about audience early on, things about insights early on, things about analytics driving the way early on. I've gotten so much feedback on that podcast, and people that have really, that was the first time they listened to it before, and they were like, "Holy crap, this is the kind of stuff that we need to know and we need to learn." So those are a couple more recent ones. I mean, I've been able to have guys from ESPN on that have been really cool and learning about how they do what they do. People from the college space have been really memorable, talking about winning national championships and how you make the most of that, and then winning NBA titles too. I have people from the Warriors on, I have people from all these teams, and there's always a great story to tell. I mean, it's like anyone you meet, everyone has a great story to tell. But being able to have people offer these different lenses, and having someone like you on, Reese, or someone like you on, Ryan. You guys were tremendous guests. I love being able to talk to people from other parts of the world, and what's going on in Australia that we don't know about, or vice versa. What can we learn from you guys? What can you learn from us? And then Ryan, having you on, and I mean, shoot, dude, the stuff with Sport Bible, Lad Bible, like the partnership activations, and thinking about monetizing content, like there's so much. There's always a great insight to learn when you have someone on in that realm, and whether it's a big league person, from someone that's like sort of at the top of the food chain at one of these big leagues or big teams, or someone that is at like a really small grassroots place, and they really have to be really innovative about how they use their resources. I remember I had my someone that I keep in touch with, a buddy at the time, he's now with the PWHL, the Professional Women's Hockey League, but at the time he was with the Peterborough Petes. I doubt you've heard of them. They are a junior hockey league team in Ontario, Canada, in the Greater Toronto area, and being able to hear about how they think about touching their community and activating those that grassroots level of digital and social, and working with these families, and that's just so cool when you realize that sometimes we get lost in these big numbers of how many millions did we reach, but sometimes you talk to someone who's like, heck, if we can reach 5,000 people, if we can sell 50 tickets, that's moving the needle for us. Or if we sell one sponsorship that's worth $5,000, that is huge for us. And it really opens your eyes to that. Like and we talk about this too, working in the greater sports space as well. Everyone thinks about, I want to work in sports, and that means working for NRL or AFL or NBA or NFL. And really, there's so much sports happening at the smaller levels too, where it's it's another job, and you get to play and think about these things around fan engagement, monetization, fan experience, and so being able to talk to people around the world has been really cool. Being able to talk to people at different levels and different leagues has been awesome. Being able to talk, I've even had some athletes on over the years, and that's been really a really treat as well, to sort of be able to get on the other side of the line, so to speak, and be like, we think this. What do you think? Like, what are you guys actually thinking? When we're asking you these mini mic questions or whatever it might be. So that's been awesome. I've also, I'll stop rambling in a moment. I've also kind of had some fun with my milestone episodes, like when I've had 10 years or 100 episodes or 200 episodes, whatever it might be. So I've had I had my mom on once. That was cool because she was someone when I started working for the Ducks. She did not know anything about ice hockey, anything. She was not a sports fan at all. And then I witnessed this transformation of she became a diehard fan, and to this day, even she knows so much about the sport, about the team, and so being able to explore her transformation. How do you keep up with it? How do you keep up with the team, and what do you care about, and why do you care about that now? Especially now that I'm not even there. So being able to have her on, I had my brother on as well, and thinking about getting that sort of quote unquote real fan perspective. Because oftentimes when we work in the space, once you work in the space, you kind of have those rose-colored glasses, or those glasses on always, a sports biz perspective. You don't realize, well, the average fan doesn't care about this. They're not looking at this. Like, they're not discovering you the way you think they are necessarily. So being able to have sort of those average fan conversations, whenever I have like I meet someone new, we hire someone new at Greenfly, or I talk to some of my younger cousins or nieces and nephews, and think about how are they engaging on social media. Are they using Snapchat? Are they using stories on Snapchat? Are they just using messages? And do you follow these athletes, or do you follow the team? Do you notice when the team posts sponsor content? Do you care? So I just love all levels of it. So I know it was a relatively brief question. I went off for hours, but that's why I host a podcast, because I just can talk forever.
That last point is really poignant. When you're kind of in the bubble of sport, and Reese, I'm sure you can attest to this, but like our time at the NRL, everything is so insular. You think that everyone loves the NRL. You think that they're checking their Instagram, their Snapchat, their TikTok like 50 times a day to see what the NRL has posted. You think they really care about all the details, what the NRL is doing. And then when you leave the space, it's like your world is completely blown up. And it's like people don't have the attention or the capacity to be thinking like that. And whilst you're in it, you believe that that's the case. When you get out of it and you see that perspective, and I guess it's part of the benefits of you hosting a podcast with so many guests from so many varying backgrounds, you get that perspective, right? You understand that it isn't all about you when you're in that environment. There's so much else going on.
Totally. I mean, even as marketers, we have to step back always and be like, our audience is not other marketers. Like, I mean, heck, like you hear that all the time of like a campaign that was almost made to get a headline on Ad Age because they want to impress other marketers. And it's like, that's not who you're trying to impress, guys. It's not who you're trying to reach.
Yeah, I think with the even with like it's something like the draw release, it's so big in clubland or league land, you think every fan really cares. But when you sort of move out, no one, it's besides the hardcore rusted on fans, does anyone really care that much about a draw release? The season's still 3-4 months away from starting. I always find that draw release an interesting one, especially now being on the other side, because it was so big when we were at the NRL or even at the Cronulla Sharks in the early days. But then once you leave, it's like, yeah, okay, we've got some cool games happening, but I'll wait until the season starts. I always think that's quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, more and more over the years, like we've by design, because of sort of the potential monotony of sports. Like, I mean, the more you're in the space, like when you're in the NRL, like you have, okay, well, it's gonna be Christmas once a year every year. It's gonna be we're gonna have this happen once a year every year. We're gonna have opening day, and so you start to think about like what are these opportunities for us to hit home runs. And I always call it like sort of Moneyball for social media. Like we can hit singles all day, but how's our slugging percentage? How many home runs have we hit? And how can we take some swings that allow? And that means you're going to strike out too sometimes. I mean, when you swing your hardest. I know baseball's not too huge over in Australia and New Zealand, but it's getting there. We have some all season in Major League Baseball now. That's been sort of something that I've noticed over the years, the structure of our tent poles. And you think about the NFL being, in particular, the American Football League, in the NFL, they have turned the entire year in a series of tent poles. Like even when after the Super Bowl, they have, okay, well, next we got the draft, and we have free agency, and we have schedule release, and we have mini camps opening, and we have main camp opening, and we have there's so many. Everything's sort of trying to make these big tent poles because that's what's going to cut through all the other things competing for your attention, because it has to. I mean, back in the way old back days, when there was just cable TV and that was about it before the internet even. There wasn't that much competition for attention, and so when there was an NFL game on or NBA game on, that was the big thing that sometimes half everyone you knew was watching it. Now we have to find opportunities that's like, what is something that I can't not pay attention to? What is something I can't miss, even if it means I'm gonna log out of TikTok for a moment, or push pause on my Netflix show or whatever it might be. And so the NFL has been again the best at this, but trying to create these opportunities to make something feel like it's really special. And make something feel like, and that comes through home runs and content. And, the schedule release, fixture release being one of those as well. And you've seen that start to permeate to other sports and other leagues where they've kind of looked for, again, schedule release is one for them too, that they've kind of circled, well, let's work for the NFL, why doesn't it work for us? But you see other things and other ways that they're trying to create these sort of tentpole events, whether that is, a Try Hockey for Free Day in the NHL, or they have these special games in Major League Baseball. They're playing on like the Field of Dreams field because it's hard to cut through when you have 162 games in the season. How do you make one feel a little more special than the other? And I talk about this in the social media space as well with teams and leagues and people that are covering these teams. And they're like, and it's really hard that you can get in that monotony of, okay, it's another game. We're going to cover the morning shoot around, and then we're going to cover the after the game we're going to do the regular press conference and then get the same old commentary and cut clips of that. And all of a sudden it's like you blink and it's halfway through the season and you're like, shoot, like what have we done? And so and that's why also too, you're starting to see, and this is kind of relevant probably to your guys' space in sports in Australia, you're starting to see more and more teams kind of work internally to capitalize on those big moments and create those big moments, create those big foundational pieces of content, and then outsource sometimes to others for freelancing or vice versa as well. Bring in someone who's really adept at motion graphics or really adept at high level production stuff, and then focus on what they're good at internally. So I've talked to people about this too on the podcast of bringing in, okay, let's hire a freelancer, let's hire an agency to help us do our basic set of graphics, our starting lineup and our halftime updates and our score updates or our transaction updates. And then let's have our internal team spend time on these bigger things that we want to capitalize on that are big part of our brand campaigns and vice versa. So again, it just comes down to like, it's so hard to break through now and cut through. And yes, your diehard fans, your avid fans are always going to be there, but for you to reach those casual fans, that ever elusive fan that you want to, that hasn't realized they're a fan of you yet, or you're trying to move them up that sort of fan avidity ladder, you have to create those opportunities to capture their attention and give them a reason to sort of move up that ladder. And that happens through remarkable things, remarkable events, remarkable pieces of content, and remarkable opportunities and activations in the space.
Yeah, I mean, for the NFL schedule, there's obviously a lot of money and resource poured into those releases, whether it's a full graphic suite of illustrations or an animated series that goes out. Like, I'm always keen to know, especially here, having spoken to a few people in Clubland, like what's the tie back to revenue? Because obviously the higher ups will always ask that question, what's the ROI? Why are we spending 10, 20, 30K on a schedule release or a draw release for no return? Is it memberships? Is it ticket sales? Is it just fan engagement, exposure, brand exposure, etc.? I'd love to get your take on that one.
No, totally. That's the multi-million-dollar question sometimes, and it's something that's I think becoming more of a talking point. I know that my friend in the industry and probably someone that everyone knows, Jess Smith, wrote a nice piece about that, and her and I kind of offlined a little bit too, talking about that as well. And that was a question that when Jason from the Chargers was on, I asked him straight up. I mean, they've kind of won quote unquote schedule release multiple times, you could say, and just continue to kick ass in everything they do. But I asked him, like, what's the ROI of this thing? And he kind of gave me a bit of a stock answer of like, we want fans to know when the games are. We want to get them excited about buying tickets. And yeah, okay. I mean, there's something to that, and getting people excited about the season to come and getting season ticket leads and all that. But ultimately, it's a little bit. There's a handful of things that I've kind of been able to circle. And again, I recommend reading Jess's piece on her blog at Word Jess Eagle, where she really talked about how can you start to think about this more holistically. Of like, this is not just a one-off post, but how can you build tangential activations off it? Can you create like a merch line that has to do with it? Can you create an ongoing series throughout the season that has to do with it? Ultimate, like immediate ROI, yes, you can have some social media growth and follower count and all that and attention. But it's also an opportunity to kind of establish your brand and say this is why you should be a fan of us and why you're going to why we're going to stand out. But the way I've heard it exposed to me over times or elucidated to me over times is, one, it's an opportunity for your creative team to really flex their muscles and say, look at what we can do when we're given the time and resource and opportunity to do something. And that oftentimes can lead to just getting the attention of potential partners. And then when I say that, I mean sponsors, core partners who want to activate with you. And then secondarily, when you do get those sponsors in the room with you, you have their trust. There's a reason that I'm sure when someone goes to work with like a Mr. Beast, they're not like giving him a script and saying this is exactly how it's going to go. They're saying these are our goals. Do your thing because you everything you do is really good. So very similarly, we think about that with the sports space of like, hey, we know you're really good. We know you create really awesome stuff. We trust you. We want to work with you because everything you do is really good, and we see it. There's proof of it with your schedule release potentially. So they're going to hand it over to you and say, we want to work with you. We're going to pay you to work with you. Maybe we're going to pay a premium because we know that you create some really awesome stuff, and we're going to trust you. So that I think is just one of the biggest things is A, attracting partners in the first place, and B, getting the trust to do so when you do. And then, yes, there's sort of those ancillary things whether it's activating a partner within the schedule release, that's becoming more and more prominent as well. I mean, heck, I thought the New England Patriots did a good job this year of product placement. It wasn't overt, but within their sort of Goodwill Hunting film thing, you could see like Pepsi and Dunkin' Donuts, I think it was, were very clearly featured in there. So that's an opportunity as well. You can sell some ancillary merch. I think that's becoming. I think more and more you're seeing teams kind of start to think like creators, where they're going to drop ship merchandise and drop ship other accessories. The Carolina Hurricanes, I think, with my buddy Dan and Mike Foreman there, have done a great job of capitalizing opportunities with merchandise. So I think you're going to see more and more of that, and creating, kind of setting that up through schedule release of, we're going to create this sort of motif or this storyline that we're going to be able to then create merch off of, or maybe create some ancillary content off of it as well. So that opportunity is really big. You're also starting to see a little bit of data capture. This happens less with the schedule release content, but more with, like, you see whether it's with a draft or with schedules, you'll see like every year now teams are starting to do like predict our schedule, and you'll win XYZ from a sponsor or whatever. And that's their opportunity to get your name and your email, get you in their database, learn more about you as a fan, and ultimately monetize you down the line as well. And then lastly is sort of this digital identity, this fan identity. This goes back a little bit to I could wax on this all day about like the metaverse and sort of this growth in digital merchandise, and being able to be proud that you are a fan of this team, and then B is secondarily being able to show that you are a fan of this team. There's a reason that I wear a Padres hat, a San Diego Padres hat when I'm walking around. What is the digital analog of that? When I have a bumper sticker on my car, or when I have a welcome mat in front of my door that says you're entering Padres territory, wherever it might be. How can you also get fans to want to be part of that and to showcase that through these new digital methods, whether that's putting something in their avatar image or putting something in their bio, or using an inside meme or a hashtag or a joke that only fans know about, let alone as we get into digital merchandise and digital apparel, and we think about like metaverse type stuff. So that's another thing too as well, of making it really cool to be a fan of that team. And whether you end up going to a Chargers game or not, you want to be able to shout to the masses that, hey, Chargers are my team. Look at this. They're kicking ass again. They did it again. And making it, again, that sort of enviable thing, that thing that you want to be able to and you put yourself behind.
Yeah, there's so many points that I want to call out of what you just said. I think one of the big things that I constantly struggle with is the amount of negative attention that like social content still gets from execs, and it bleeds through to like the resources that are allocated in terms of headcount, in terms of budget. Yet we're still seeing like leagues and teams spend exorbitant amounts of money on like 30-second TV ads, and that's never questioned. That ROI question is never kind of being hit, but it's social that is always being hammered of what's the ROI, and it makes you think, like, when are we going to see that shift where it's like, hold on, like, we know the job that social's doing now. We know that it's all about the attention. Like, if we're not doing it, someone else is going to tell our story, and therefore we lose ownership of our own narrative. I'm curious around how the space is going to change, specifically when we're talking about investment of budget and resources and comparing some more, traditional channels to social. And when we get to that point where it's no longer like questioned the work that people are doing in creating content across social and engaging fans across social.
Totally with you. I mean, it's funny that you start to think about where the evolutionary path of digital and social. Like we learned early on, hey, we create this digital ad and we can see how many people click on it. We can see how many people convert and buy a ticket from it. And it's like, holy crap. Now this new level of expectation was set that anything in the digital and social world, digital space overall, we should be able to track it, end to end. But then you start to realize that, like, hey, then you start to get these newer things. I put my sort of digital marketing geek hat on a little bit of like, last touch attribution. Well, if they didn't click on the Facebook ad and convert from there, then what the hell is the point of the Facebook ad? They even if they go and Google search it later, or search on their app later to actually buy a ticket or buy a piece of merchandise, whatever it might be. And so we're getting a little bit better at tracking that funnel. But even if you think about way back when, there's famous lines all the time around like, not understanding the ROI of a billboard, and yet we never take it for granted that we're going to put a billboard out there. And same with old school linear TV commercials. With Connect TV, it's going to grow a little bit more. You start to learn about who's watching your ads and all that. But the idea of like, hey, we used to put these broadcast level commercials out, and we had no idea what they were going to accomplish or not. We just knew that we were getting a lot of attention, and in that case, it wasn't even engaged attention. Now you know who's actually paying attention to your stuff. And so being able to, as you alluded to, Ryan, like attention is currency, and being able to understand that when we engage someone, it might not mean they're going to go turn around and buy something tomorrow, or even click on your next ad, but it all fits together into this funnel. Like you should be able to see, and this is why I would recommend listening to that podcast interview with Dan Gadd, because he really gets it at that executive level. And there's also another encouraging point is that people that grew up in the space are starting to ascend to those VP C-suite levels that do quote unquote get it, but starting to understand that, hey, when we put out really strong organic content, that we can take those learnings into our paid content or paid ads and anything we're doing from a marketing perspective. We can learn what's resonating with fans, but also we can start to understand that when we are doing well organically, our paid does better as well, because we're talking to a warmed up fan base. And yes, it might not be a direct, you're not going to have the direct metric and perfect spreadsheet that you really want, at least not today. Maybe in the future, you're going to start to track every single data point, but that's a whole privacy conversation as well of understanding every fan and all that. But understanding that there's an element of value to being able to touch someone emotionally and get them more engaged with your team, so that, and there's I can go off on this all day of like, you don't like, how do you create the fan that is talking to their friends and their family about the team all the time and creating that sort of fan evangelist that you're never going to know because they're doing it in person with their actual voice. Like what a concept. It's not trackable, just like dark social as well for that matter. But that's the most valuable fan, is that fan evangelist, as your voluntary marketing force, being able to keep on them all the time. And then I also am a broken record when it comes to tracking even the stuff that we can measure. We can't quite measure the power of something as much as we really want to. We can estimate and try to think about it. But when someone watches something that really touches them emotionally and something they're going to remember days from now, years from now, even, how can you equate that to like a quick double tap on some meme that they're going to forget about in 30 seconds or as they move on to the next one? So that level too of like, how can we make sure that we are penetrating with these? I remember early on, I had someone, he's now at Huddle, I think, which is a college recruiting platform. But one of my first podcast guests, probably in the first like 20 or 30 or so, a guy named Kelly Mosier, Mosier, he was at Nebraska at the time, a big college athletics program right here. And he introduced to me, and I've been saying this ever since, is deep engagement. How do we think about deep engagements and really getting someone to feel something about you? And that's what it's all about. And we learn about that from reading like, Jordan Berger and Contagious of what's going to make someone actually want to share, whether that is on social and digital by pushing the share button, or by talking about it offline or with their friends or with their family, or becoming an evangelist. And it's that level of remarkability of what's getting someone to emote and what's evoking a feeling in them. And that's really what it's all about. Like, you're not going to be able to know, okay, we thought this was going to make someone feel really inspired. We don't know. There's no metric to measure inspiration at this point, or sadness or happiness or excitement or joy. All we can do is try to evoke those emotions, and maybe there's some ways through surveying and whatnot. But ultimately, you should see things kind of move up in tandem, the sort of rising tide lifting the proper boats. So when you are having success from an organic perspective, it's going to make your paid stuff work better, and that's going to go hand in hand because your team is cooler, so to speak. Your fans are warmed up, and so it's welcome to them when they see these paid and promotional things. It's not something that they are not already have an affinity for, and so it's really like thinking about how are you growing that affinity over time and making it so that when you do sort of the Gary Vaynerchuk jab, right hook, not a perfect analogy, but something along those lines of I am giving someone so much value, making them fall in love with me. I remember too, this guy Jay Baer, Baer, who's been a social media thought leader for a long time too. He's always said organic social media is where you make someone fall in love with you. It's not where you make someone fall in like with you. That happens on sort of these like more casual platforms, these paid platforms. Get them into your funnel, and then you get them to fall in love with you in these organic platforms. And so, how can you make sure that you're not going to create new fans necessarily from getting those deep engagements on the organic platforms? You have to think about how can we get more fans into our ecosystem, and then get those more stronger feelings that turn someone into a fan for life. I mean, that's what we're ultimately after. Is, and again, Dan Gadd said this really well also, and a lot of people have. So Jason as well. We're creating generational fans, and that requires a lot of long-term thinking. if you want, and that has such immense lifetime value. If you get someone to become a fan of yours at 9, 10, 19, 20 years old, you have potentially 40, 50, 60 years in them being a fan. They may never go to a single game, but they may buy some merchandise here and there. They may tell their friends. They may wear their merchandise around and say, "I'm a fan." That may create another fan because they see that. And so you really have to be comfortable with that, understanding that we're not going to be able to measure every single touch point into a direct sale tomorrow because we have social media is both a short game and a long game, but it should all go hand in hand together. That when you're having success in one area, it's going to improve the ROI of your marketing dollars that you are spending to get those more immediate direct results.
Let's make more fans fall in love with us. I think that is the overarching statement there. Absolutely. Let's shift gears a little bit. We have watched from afar kind of the build up to conference over there, and that conference is Gondola, and we would love to kind of get your perspective. We know you attended. We think that pretty much everyone in our feed across LinkedIn and Twitter attended. We're even thinking about bringing an Australian contingent over next year. But give us a bit of a rundown of Gondola and what it is, what you took away from it, and what you loved about it.
Heck yeah, just a great experience, and I love the guys at Gondola. Jared Kleinstein being first and foremost a former podcast guest, of course, as well, and the inventor of Tebowing, among other things. But Gondola, as your listeners may know, is a platform where it started out kind of like as like an IMDb for social media creatives and creators. Now it's sort of evolved into this place where it's like a living portfolio of your work, tracking your metrics, and for people to come and hire you and be able to look up creators based on the work that they've been able to do. It's also now a place where you can brainstorm ideas together and collaborate as a team. And they wanted to create this sort of they use sort of the old Twitter Sports Summit as a guiding light for this. So back in the day when Twitter had a sports team, now they just have like nobody. They had this annual summit where it would bring the doers into a conference. I think a lot of times too. I talked about this even internally with our own Greenfly team. And it's great too to have like the commissioner of the NBA is on the stage talking, and that's great to hear those big picture strategy conversations. But to be able to have people that are in the trenches every day, that are living this, that are doing the grind, and thinking about how do we create dozens and dozens of graphics, how do we create this incredible video, and why are we doing it, and how do we command resources for it? It's really that's what the Sports Summit then and now the Gondola Summit this year brought together people that are really making those day-to-day level decisions, running operations, running a team, and thinking about what's necessary and what's valuable from a resources and content perspective. And just a really awesome event, being able to obviously meet people as well face-to-face as people that I've only met digitally for a long time. There are a handful of people like that, and then other people that I haven't seen in a long time. So being able to have that social element was awesome. And I think some of the big learnings were just being able to think about the operationalizing of these spaces now, and thinking, and not just again, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier with my own podcast of what are those bigger picture questions about the why are we doing this, and not just about, and even when it comes to the sort of the more frivolous stuff like voice and savagery and memes, but think about the strategy behind that. Like how are we doing this? Why are we doing this? How do we measure success of this? When is it the right time to make a voice change? How do we define our voice and document it? And that's from that single perspective, but. They had a great mix of variety of panels thinking about, they had an actual pro athlete on. That was kind of cool to get someone to actually like ask them like, what do you want from someone when it comes to working with content? And he was like, I have the same, I want someone to help me with my goals and building my brand. And so that was really cool to hear that. People from the individual platforms were on talking about what Meta's working on, what TikTok's working on, what Snapchat's working on. And it's always I think anyone that works in space knows it's a cheat code when someone from the platform is talking about something, when there's a press release from a platform about something, that means that they're going to be favoring that stuff in the recommendation feed and all that. So if they're saying that they're excited about this new feature, you should probably use that new feature because you're going to get a little leg up early on. So that's always really helpful as well to get the inside scoop from them. And then even thinking about like the day-to-day operations when you're putting together a team, how many people should be on your team? Like what skills should you prioritize? Is it better to be a generalist or should you hire specialists? And when it comes to like media days, what's the best way to get content out from a media day? How do you make the athletes really comfortable? How do you think about stuff that you may not need now, but you're going to need 6 months from now? How do we get that Merry Christmas post, even if you're shooting it in July? So there's a lot of these opportunities too to think about like how are these teams creating these massive content banks? And I think that for someone that is not living in a day to day, and heck, that's myself included. I'm not in the trench day to day creating content. but really thinking about like how are they approaching this from a sophisticated, complex perspective, and that there are these complex operations happening. More people that have sort of quote unquote graduated. Not that everyone needs to graduate from this, but have moved into a different role where they're not quote unquote pushing the buttons anymore. They're in those seats where they're allocating that, delegating that to others, and they have to think through these things of why are we doing this? Like how much content should we produce? Why should we produce this much? How do we monetize this? Owning the budget, like, and making a case for budget as well. There was some good conversation around that, around how do you talk to the quote unquote higher ups and to make a case for why we need this new piece of hardware or why we need to make this higher. And so all these questions that really help us do better in our day-to-day roles, understanding what moves the needle. And it's not the same for every organization, but everyone kind of has a lot of similar challenges where there's always demand for more. There's always a demand for revenue generation. There's always a demand for justifying why you need things, when justifying your budget, justifying your pure existence sometimes. And so it's great to hear that from people that are living it day to day and are ultimately succeeding as well day to day.
I think you've cemented us going next year. What do you reckon, Reese?
Definitely. We're definitely looking into it right at this minute.
Hell yeah. No, I joked with you guys. We need a version in Australia, so the world will come out to you.
Yeah, we'd love to. Love to host one.
Neil, I loved your point around, I guess jumping from being a creator to being a manager and leading and not being on the tools as such. How do you find that jump? Or how, like having spoken to, a lot of people in the industry, a lot of people still like creating content, but in order to get a pay rise or more recognition, you need to be in a managerial type role. How does one that loves creating and being on the tools and being behind the camera, etc., take on a managing type role? Or is it just a decision you either earn peanuts for the rest of the career as a photographer, or you go out and do your own thing as a freelancer versus becoming a manager internally, whether it's a VP of brand and content or whatever that title is?
No, it's a great question. It's something that I hit on all the time with people that I meet in the space. And I mean, first off, I will say as a default, as like not everyone needs to become a manager. To your point, though, that sometimes it's the only route, or at least it feels like the only route to get that bigger compensation, that bigger pay raise, that bigger title. And so it can be kind of force fed a little bit. What I've heard mostly over the years, one is that people that do move away from that, it's really hard at first, because you're reading everything, you're reading every little tweet and being like, oh, I would do it this way, I would do it this way. I went through myself, in my roles as well, of not being the one that was writing every piece of copy. But you also, what I've heard has been worked and also experienced myself, is you start to really take pride and take gratification in helping others succeed. And you start to live through them. You get excited not just by something that does well, but because the person that you taught and helped to mentor does really well as well. So getting that gratification from other levels is certainly one area. I've also seen kind of the semi-reverse of this area, where someone that I was able to speak to at Gondola, actually, Shabazz Khan, who's now with the NFL. He's had a freaking dream job resume. If you guys know his name, he's been at Nike, at the Sacramento Kings, at Uninterrupted. But he is someone that it was really cool to kind of watch him go from being that button pusher, pushing out the tweets, creating that quick level content, then getting that more managerial level role. And then he's like, you know what? I'm going to learn how to learn photography. And during games, he would go with the camera, and now he's like, he helps with the photography operation, or he did at the time when he was with the NBA team. And so it's a little bit all the above too, where you never want to stop growing, and that can mean learning new managerial skills or finding new ways to expand your skill set. If you do love creating, continue to create, and see where can I help? Where can I help add value? Whether that's teaching someone else something new, or picking up the camera and learning photography for the first time, learning how to do motion graphics for the first time. And the more you're never going to lose that element, I think, as long as you prioritize it and make it a part of what you want to learn, because the stuff's always changing. And so if you can learn something new and jump in, that's always a way to sort of stretch your skill set. But again, it also comes down to like, if learning how to manage is a skill also, and being able to get that gratification of seeing others succeed is something that I think if you're going to be a successful manager of people, you have to really learn to love that. And that has to, and I hear that as well come through people that I talk to that are in the leadership roles, where they're a proud parent almost, and being able to pass those skills on to others. And so again, it's not for everyone. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to. But even if you do, if that's the only route up to get that bigger paycheck, then find ways you can still contribute creatively, and jump in those seats, or find an opportunity where do something like Sport Design Australia and start your own thing, and do it that way. But there's really no like set right answer there. But it's been cool to hear the stories over the years. People have been in that situation, and it's not easy. Everyone goes through that initial time when they first leave the buttons or leave the keys, so to speak. It's not supposed to be easy, and so if it's not easy for someone that's listening to this, you're in the same boat as everyone else, but you'll find your way to still be gratified with your role.
Yeah, it can be incredibly hard to let go and give control to someone else, especially when you've been on or creating content for the channel or typing out the tweets, etc. for yourself, and then giving someone else, I guess, the keys to the voice is always hard. But to your point around the different roles of a social creator, like obviously social media producers, take on videography, they can do photography, they look after the tweets, they look after Instagram Reels, etc. I find it's also a dangerous attribute of our roles, because we take on so many different roles or jobs that our executives expect us to do everything. And a lot of, especially here in Australia, a lot of executives expect the social teams, which are usually a 1 to 2 man band, to be doing literally everything across the board. And that just leads to burnout within a year or two. And then said business needs to go back to the drawing board and then rehire. It happens quite a lot here, and I know it's obviously happened quite a lot over in the States, but, the teams there have evolved into, I was chatting to Selena, Phoenix Suns lead designer, a few weeks ago, and they have 8 designers and then a separate motion graphics team. Yet here in Australia, we've got 1 or 2 designers for an NRL or AFL team that are, spread between marketing, membership, football, social, website, digital, and it's just nuts.
Oh, I mean, you're preaching, man. It's always funny to see those job descriptions where it's like one person needs to be an expert in this, and this, and you're like, yeah, I don't think that person exists. So if they do, they're not great at any one thing. They're a master of none, so to speak. And I think what tends to really work well in those conversations is everyone kind of has that boss or knows that boss of like. I dealt with this at the ownership level sometimes in my own roles, where someone comes to you and they're like, "Hey, this organization did this. Why can't we do that?" And you're like, "Well, let me tell you, because this is what my to-do list looks like right now, and I can spend all day and learn these skills and do this, or I can do all these other things." And so you have to understand the sort of the trade-off, and that there's only so much that a given team can do, let alone do at an expert level. And you can be mediocre at a lot of things. You can be mediocre and and create a lot of volume. But if you want to create something that's really special, you have to have the time and effort to do it, and people to do it as well. And so it's really like I'm seeing more and more conversations happen where someone's literally writing down how long it takes to create something. And if someone wants to stand over their shoulder and watch them do it because they don't believe it, they can do that and start to understand that every piece of content we create takes effort and there's a certain level of people skills that need to do that, or people power, as well as budget sometimes as well. I think we're gonna have that whole conversation kind of recycled again as as generative AI becomes more and more of a thing. As people are gonna start to assume that you can do more and more. I had Akshay Ram on my podcast recently, who's from Adobe, and he talks sports creatives all the time, and that was something that he touched on a little bit of like, what can you be comfortable with outsourcing to quote unquote AI or to these more or to templates that you can empower the PR person to do because they have more time to do when they're sitting on a plane or something like that. They can just input something into a template. And so how can you empower others to be creative and focus on the higher level things that require more time, more effort? And so part of it is, yes, the creative person needs to be given that leeway and that time in order to create really cool shit and that breaks through. But it's also partly on the creative person to think about, okay, where can I not cut corners is wrong, but where can I save time? What is going to move the needle for our organization? And what can I cut? And what do I need to make the case for hiring elsewhere? And say I need this motion graphics person because we're going to be able to create this kind of content that's going to produce this kind of result that we think. And yes, it might mean a trade-off here or there. That means we're not going to spend the money on this. But understanding that there is a method to all this, a business to all this, an operational sort of plan to all this, and there's a why we need this, why we're doing this. And so it goes back to that justification as well. But again, it also comes down to understanding like what do we prioritize? What's the best use of our current resources? What can we do with more resources? And there's also another thing too, is when you're talking to a boss or thinking about how you're planning a strategy out. It's like, okay, well, if we have this much budget, this is what we can do. If we have this much, this is what we can do. If we have this much, this is what we can do. And so then it's on them almost say, okay, do we want to be good, better, or best? And if you want to be the best, and you claim that, everyone claims they want to be the best. But in order to be the best, you have to understand what it takes to do that. And that means people, that means budget, that means time, that means effort. And so I think it's starting to understand those things, that there's a trade-off to everything. And there's a reason that, sometimes the teams and leagues that get the most praise on the social media side, everyone's always like, well, or not everyone, but people that are in the know are like, hey, you don't know what resources they're operating under. You don't know what the bosses are telling them. Everyone is trying to do the best they can given their resources and goals and objectives. And so the quote unquote best might just be the one that has the biggest team and the most resources and the most budget, or the most creative leeway and creative enterprise and creative agency to do what they want to do. And so it's, we have to both either make our situation as good as we can, and or make the best of our current situation given the restraints.
I think creatives nearly have to be an internal salesperson to kind of sell it into their bosses, to either help them get to a position of better or accept the fact that they're at their current standard.
Something that I've always taken to heart is, even if you can't be the quote unquote best across all platforms, can you be the best at something? We're not going to be the best at everything, but can we be the best motion grabs person, or can we be the best on TikTok? That's not always the right framework or mindset, I guess. But if you can claim that among our league, among our counterparts, among our peers, we are the best at X, that's a cool thing to be able to hang your hat on, and to be able to to take something you can always build on as well. Say, hey, we are the best on Snapchat. We could be the best elsewhere, but we need to invest in it.
Love that. That's a great little nugget. That's a great nugget to end on. Before we finish, though, we got 5 quick questions. So we want them to be short, sharp answers. First one is, who's the leading creative team in US sports?
Oof, you're going to make me upset some friends here, probably. I mean, I think it's a little bit fresh in my mind, but I would be remiss to not mention both a couple of the Boston teams. I mean, the Boston Celtics, what they're doing with video content is just unreal, and thinking about it from a different perspective, and he's kind of zigging where everyone else is zagging. I also point out what the Atlanta Falcons have done over the time too, of trying out new video angles and new ideas. And also that comes from their leader, Scott Cagley, who used to be at the Vikings 49ers as well, thinking about different mediums, different formats. So I will call it the Boston Celtics as well as the Boston Bruins. Look at what their creative director, Mark, he came from University of Michigan, I want to say, but he's been in and around Boston College as well. But you can see what's really always cool when you know a talented creative is starting a new role, starting a new organization, you see the rapid transformation of like, holy crap, like it just went from like a 6 out of 10 to like a 9 or 10 out of 10. And it changes the brand. It changes the perception you have of their creative team. So check out what the Boston Bruins have done. So we think about the Celtics, we think about NBA. And yes, I am biased potentially because I started my career in the NHL. But the Boston Bruins, they have such an awesome creative aesthetic now. And it was so elevated from the time that Mark and his team came in there.
Love it. What about the best social team in US sports?
Best social team. There's so many good ones there, man. I mean, I mentioned the Chargers earlier, so I won't continue to tout them. They get plenty of love as it is. I also mentioned the Carolina Hurricanes earlier as well, who just do such a good job of really speaking their fans' language and taking advantage of opportunities and capitalizing on those opportunities. I beg your pardon. So those are a couple that stand out. I think on the college space also, I've always been a big fan of what Georgia has done, what LSU has done in the SEC. Take a look with it. I actually had Brandon Barrio, who's now with LSU football, but he was with LSU athletics in general when I had him on the podcast, and he talked about kind of what goes into creating these really great foundational pieces and these big executions. So the college space, it's always funny too. I actually had this conversation on my podcast so with some frequency of why for a while, I think it's not as much anymore, but for a while the college space was dominating the pros in some ways. Like they were creating these cinematic masterpieces, and it's like, why don't the pros do this? You're starting to see that pollinate a little bit more throughout the major pro sports. But early on, like if you think a couple of years ago, like Ohio State football was creating these Hollywood level trailers for their games, and it's like, holy crap, like this is something that would not look out of place if it was before a movie on the big screen, and it was coming from a college football team. And so like the Ohio State is one. Again, I think they still continue to do a good job as well. If you want to look for really great creative video content, BYU and what Tyson Hutchins is doing there with his team as well on the college space. And I mean, I could go all day on these. There's so many good ones out there, and there's also they're good for different reasons too. Like sometimes someone's really good at voice, someone's really good at engaging with their fans, someone's really good at working with their players. I mean, heck, the Buffalo Bills. If you look at their TikTok, like again, not everyone has the buy-in with their players that they do, but they get such good buy-in from their players, and they just understand that platform so well. They just go off the grid, off the charts. of doing crazy, wacky shit that it just blows up in a good way. So check out the Buffalo Bills on TikTok also, and there's just so many good ones, man. And sometimes people are really good at monetized content, really good at sponsor content. I thought for years the Packers were really interesting in that space of the Green Bay Packers of creating interesting, quick, and easy but relevant sponsored content. There's a lot of good ones, but I hope there's a few there you guys can go check out.
Yeah, well, we could do a whole episode on all these favorite teams of yours.
Well, that's the cool part of doing the podcast too, is you have a guest on and you start to learn what's interesting about this guest and their organization. And so you get to learn, like, every organization is something they're really good at. As you go over time and have 250 guests on over the years, you start to learn everyone is really good at something, and it sticks with you.
Yeah, love it. Who's an athlete that's harnessing social really well?
A little time, I guess, would be Bryson DeChambeau. I mean, you look at he just won the U.S. Open golf. Depending on when you're listening to this, I might be dating this podcast a little bit, but you look at what he's doing on YouTube, and being able to really, he's been someone too who his personality was really not great, or his perception was at least not great a few years ago when he went to live and all that, and he's used social media really effectively to overturn that. But that was more fresh in my mind. One that I want to call out, which is someone that is probably not someone that everyone would talk about, but someone who does a great job, is Coco Gauff. She is a U.S. tennis player, and she's a really young, still really young. I think she's only like 20 years old, maybe if even that. And she does such a good job of being active, being present. Kind of when you're watching her, like on her Instagram stories in particular, her Instagram feed, and she's at these major Grand Slam events, and it's like you should be really nervous and like preparing for your Wimbledon match or for your Australian Open match, and she feels like she's a friend taking you around like she's any other person that's at the in this great city or at this great tournament. She's kind of acts like a creator almost. You're seeing, it's her creating the content, not just something like she's not just posting someone created for her. So that's one that I want to call it. That'd be kind of different that not everyone would think about. Check out Coco Gauff, and hopefully she continues to kick ass in tennis. She'd be a great ambassador for the sport for the next 20, 30 years. I'm
so glad that you included both golf and tennis in that. Reese and I were watching the golf yesterday morning and we're chatting while it was happening. And I've been a big fan of Bryson and seen him change, I guess, his approach to his fans and to the game of golf. And you just look at all the scenes from him winning yesterday, said he wanted every fan to touch the US Open trophy, and he meant it. Like, he literally went through the crowd, and you can see the footage of like people just grabbing it, and they loved it. Similar for tennis, like these individual sports have been so media washed out and so dry for so long. It's great to see some of these athletes kind of understand their role in harnessing and engaging that audience and build their own personality. So I'm really glad you touched on both of those sports.
The athletes have to be willing to show some vulnerability. Like, it's one thing when your team loses and you can go kind of backtrack or say like, hey, was it a team effort? We lose the team, was the team. But sometimes when it's just you and you have no, I think Rory McIlroy is taking like a break now from golf the next couple of weeks because he doesn't want to face the music, so to speak. But when you see those individuals that will come on and be vulnerable in front of their fans, like that's how you make a fan for life. And you get that emotional connection that you really understand this person as a human.
100%. All right, two more. Biggest tip for those breaking into the industry?
Ooh, I love this one. This one has a lot of different directions. One obvious one, I'll give you two. One obvious one is just go out there and create. Like, when I was coming up, I didn't really have that option. I think about if I was coming up now, I would be creating a podcast, creating a YouTube channel, create a TikTok. I mean, heck, you can even create one that's kind of like a fan account for your favorite team that you want to work for, and you can show that you can prove, say, hey, I'm not just saying I can do this on my resume. I can grow a fan base with content. Look, here's the proof right there. And heck, like, you can create so much on your own now. And before you know it, someone is dying to hire you because they want someone with your expertise and with your knowledge and with your proven track record of being able to do that. So whether it's in whatever medium is best for you, written, audio, video, pick that out and get on it and do it, because you can get that way. The other one too, I like a lot, and I think is really good for both a creative person and a non-creative person. I don't consider myself a creative anymore. I've been long surpassed by anyone in the space. But being able to articulate the how of something, especially now, like I know it's common practice oftentimes for a creative that sees a really sick graphic or a really cool video, effect or whatnot, and they go and try to reproduce it themselves in Photoshop or whatever it might be, or in After Effects. That's a really good way to practice if you're a creative. I think for me, like what I often look at, or what I would recommend others to do as well if they're coming up, is if you see a really cool piece of creative even, or a really cool campaign, think about how you would pitch that, or how you would make that happen if you just had to like pitch it to a higher up, saying this is why we're creating this campaign. These are the elements to it, and especially nowadays with more and more stuff that's going to ultimately become prompts in the future. Or like I think about it for myself, what does a good creative brief make? If you go on these Mid-Journey platforms or Stable Diffusion, any sort of those like DALL-E platforms, you have to be really good at describing what you want, every single element, to consider every single detail. And then the better you get at doing that, you're going to be well set up for the AI future. It's also whoever you work with from a creative aspect is going to really appreciate all the detail you're giving them about how you want something down to the detail. And if you're someone that's more on the strategy side, what's going to become a more and more important skill moving forward is the ability to articulate a prompt in this case, or at least articulate a how, a why, a so what, and understanding every detail that matters. And so whether it's planning a social media campaign or thinking about how you want an email written or how you want an ad created, the more and more you can get good at articulating how something comes to life, that's going to become a more and more important skill moving forward, and force you to really think about those things in a really strategic and detail-oriented way.
Nice. There's some great tips. Last one for you, mate. What's one trend we're going to see emerge or take more focus over the next 12 months?
That's a tough one. I haven't thought about that one enough. I think you're already starting to see it now a little bit of like, and this is not necessarily a new trend, but more and more premium content. There's more and more demand for premium, and some of that you're starting to see behind the paywall. If you look at following the NHL and Stanley Cup final pretty closely, I noticed the Edmonton Oilers are creating some sort of that all access behind the scenes content that they are putting behind a paywall. It's for their digital members only. You're seeing more and more teams that are starting to think about their like OTT platforms, or what's going to get people to come to our YouTube channel. And yes, there's still a place for that quick short form stuff. That's not going away. Your Instagram Reels and your YouTube Shorts, but everyone's starting to think about now of like, how can we invest more in this more premium level content, that the stuff that's going to live on YouTube forever and get money that way, and the more passive income, the stuff that we can ultimately put behind a paywall, stuff that's going to get people to come to our app or come to our YouTube page or come to our website or ultimately go to your smart TV app. That's going to come moving forward as well. There's already success being seen in this with everything that these external platforms are creating, whether it's like Bleacher Report investing in that content, or YouTube investing in that content, or Netflix investing in that content. Everyone's starting to realize that, hey, we can create our own Drive to Survive too. It's going to make our fans that much more avid and that much more emotional. So I think you're going to see more and more, especially as day-to-day creative gets somewhat commoditized here and there, of how can we, and it kind of brings our conversation full circle a little bit, of how can we hit more home runs, how can we create something really, really remarkable and invest in this a level of premium content that does take a lot of time and investment, but can really win long-term and also have passive staying power as well. I think you're also going to see more and more use of archival content, and that comes into play. I think a few years ago the Chicago Bulls made a really good move when they created an Instagram archive account. The Bulls are a little bit unique in that they have such a rich history and have such good archive of their history with photography and whatnot. They created an IG account that's just for their archive content. They've been able to monetize that. As content creation gets a little bit more easier and easier. I mean, heck, like, how far off are we of going into like a Sora or one of these video generation platforms and being able to say, hey, here's all my footage from the last 20 years. Here's all my photographs. Here's all my transcripts. Create a 20-minute feature film that has generative AI characters that are pretending to be these players that are spouting off their real quotes from interviews and splicing in highlights from the games and splicing in highlights from fans and all that. And so I think you're more and more going to see teams starting to realize that, hey, they're sitting on this gold mine of content, whether that's transcripts or old footage. And as generative AI gets more better and better, I think that's going to be something to really watch. Maybe not next 12 months, but certainly the next 24, 36, 48 months of how can we start to monetize this huge bit of archive. And nostalgia never gets old. That's a funny statement.
That's a great statement. I think it's equal amounts scary and equal amounts exciting about what the future could hold from a content perspective.
Hell yeah.
Hey, that's been a great chat. It's what a beast of a podcast. I feel like there's so many nuggets in there. I'm going to go back and rewatch this just so I can take some notes of all the teams that we should be following and the creators that we should be following. I just want to say a big thanks again for joining the Art of the Game podcast. We appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us at the end of your workday. Yeah, just appreciate your commitment to the industry and your curiosity that kind of sparks us on a daily basis. So, thanks for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for your kind words, and I appreciate you guys as well helping to push this industry forward from Australia, New Zealand, and certainly beyond as well, all around the world. And we're all continuing to learn as we go too. We're not making this up as we go quite as much anymore, but we are certainly adding more knowledge. And not a day goes by where we don't learn something new or get inspired by something new that we haven't seen before. And so let's keep that mindset going. And who knows where we'll be in a year, 2 years, 3 years from now.
Exactly. Great parting words. And hopefully we'll see you at Gondola next year.
Hell yeah. That'd be awesome.